Hi, I'm Shannon Thomas, and I'm joined by Dr. Paul Looney. We're both mental health professionals at Woodlands Church. Today, we'd like to talk to you about grief. Sometimes grief looks a little different than what we think. Normally, we would associate grief with death of a loved one, but right now, we're actually experiencing what we call collective grief because we're experiencing a loss of normalcy, a loss of that sense of safety. Some of us have experienced financial loss or a job loss. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about how this pertains to this COVID crisis and the grieving process. So, Dr. Paul, what have you been learning about grief through this crisis?
Well, as you pointed out so well, we do think about grief when it comes to a death of a person. And sadly, has been an uptick in suicide during this crisis. And so some people are dealing with the loss of a loved one, either from suicide or from the coronavirus itself. We know that it's especially tough grieving the loss of a person because we can't enjoy the benefits of a funeral or a memorial service and coming together. We know that grief is a very individual thing, and it's complicated when there's a sudden loss, when control is gone, when we don't have good closure. And many people at this time are struggling mightily with grieving. There's not a one size fits all model for dealing with grief. There's a book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that suggested 5 stages: denial, bargaining, depression, anger, and acceptance. And many people will touch on those different stages, but every person has their own timetable and way of dealing with grief. And that's so important to remember, that whether it's my own grief or the grief of someone I loved, being respectful of the individual's need to go through the process in their own way is a really good thing to remember.
Mm, that's good. I think about the people too in this particular time. Just teachers and people who work in restaurants and just jobs who have come to a screeching halt during this crisis, and it's like it's almost like a full capacity grief loss that you're experiencing because you aren't able to do your job the way that you would normally do it. I think about the teachers who left for spring break and then weren't able to reconnect with their students in person after that because everything came to a halt during that spring break. And I think about seniors in high school or in college who are missing out on all of those celebratory, milestones that we experience in that stage of life and how difficult that must be.
So hard. And many of the strategies that help us to cope are taken from us. We can't go out to eat with our family and friends. We can't meet at the local pub or go to a ball game. We can't exercise at the gym like we usually would. So it's not only are we experiencing tremendous loss, but we're robbed of many of our coping strategies as well. You
Mhm.
mentioned the loss of capacity, and we are made for work. We're made to feel satisfied and whole when we can exert ourselves and make a difference, when we can be optimally productive. And though it's stressful to be in a job where you've got more to do than you can handle, it's actually more stressful to be underutilized, as those who have lost their jobs can well attest. It is extremely stressful to not be able to do what you do well and what provides for you and your family that sense of provision and support and consistency.
Mm. Well, one of the things I know that I've used with people who are grieving is to really make sure that you're honoring your feelings, that you're showing yourself self-compassion, you're feeling that sadness when you're feeling it, um, just validating your feelings for yourself. And then also journaling. I think journaling can be so helpful in this time too, in just trying to identify what those feelings are and really just getting them out. I know we've talked about doing grief journals before for people who are experiencing grief, to be able to set aside a time of day where you're actually writing all that stuff down and then you're kind of putting it away and you agree to go back to it at another time.
Right. I think it's so important, as you're saying, Shannon, to have a rhythm, to take time every day to dip into those feelings, to feel your sadness, your grief, your anger, whatever, and to share it or write it down. And then to metaphorically and literally set that journal aside and re-engage with life to the best of your ability, to swing back and forth between the your grieving and your engagement for life. It's tempting to do one or the other, and some people will just get stuck in their grief. Other people will just be in denial of their grief and try to power through it. But what we know is that if you don't have your feelings will have you. They are going to show up in some way. There's a phrase by Dr. Dan Siegel, name it to tame it, that if you can put words to your feelings and help your children and those around you to talk through their feelings, there is release in that. There's a sense of calm that comes as you process your feelings in a caring relationship. And it allows you, in the face of that pain, to make a better decision than you would if you avoided those feelings.
Hmm. I think another thing too that's so important during this time, Dr. Paul, is self-care and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. While we're eating healthy, we're getting enough sleep, we're doing the basics. And a lot of times when people are grieving, um, that's about all they can do. It are the basics, and that's okay. That's enough.
Yeah.
But I just think it's really important to remind people that you do what you can because you're moving through this process.
Yeah, but grief comes in waves a lot of times, and a metaphor that I like is as you're in your grief and you're kind of in a wilderness state, you want to think that there is something better ahead, that there's a promised land, if you will, that you're going to. In the Bible story of moving from wilderness to promised land, God's people had to go through the Jordan River, and the Jordan means to go down, and often we want to avoid our feelings, but when we go down into them and honor them, it helps move us through that process so that we can let go of the old and grab onto something fresh.
Mhm,
It may
mhm,
not be what we expected or hoped for or dreamed of, but it can be powerfully good if we do a good job of honoring our grief, honoring the fact that, yes, this is hard. This is not what we asked for or bargained for, expected, but we can get through it. We can do better. I think, along with caring for ourselves, we can help care for other people as well and help them also navigate their grief to get back to a better place, to find a rebound or resilience that we can get back up and
mhm,
go again.
mhm. I love that word resilience because I think, and that's part of what the acceptance stage is we realize that we are resilient people,
Mhm.
and one of the things that can help with that, I think, is really focusing on what your strengths are and what efforts have you made through this process, and writing those down and looking back at it can really help build your resilience.
I love that. We hear a lot about PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder. It's what happens for some people when they go through a traumatic time like we're going through now. Some people really get knocked down and suffer mightily, not just now, but in the future as they deal with the trauma. But the research is very clear that most people who go through trauma um, are able to navigate it such that they not only survive, but they thrive. They experience what you might call PTG, which is post traumatic growth.
Mhm.
That's what we hope for ourselves and for those that we love, that on the other side of this crisis, we will not only survive, but we will thrive, that we'll rebound and do better as a result of this terrible time.
Yeah. Dr. Paul, what do you think about people of faith and how we can navigate this?
Well, I think as a person of faith, we have a great advantage. People who are resilient have three things in common. First, they face the facts. They they don't live in denial. They realize, okay, this stinks. This is bad. This is terrible. Second thing is that they have a sense of meaning and purpose in life, which is something that we, as people of faith, believe that there's an overarching plan, there's a benevolent force at work in everything that we can trust. And the third thing that resilient people have is the ability to get back up and go again. The Bible says the righteous person falls 7 times but rises again. Resilient people um, go again. If one door closes, they go for another door. If that door closes, they go for the window. They're very committed to finding a way forward in the face of adversity. And I think as people of faith, we can take to heart that God is working in everything for good. We may not know what God is up to, but we are confident He is up to something. And
Mhm.
we can be curious about that. We can be um, persistent in calling out to Him. The other thing that we have, which is so profound and valuable, Shannon, is the assurance that God cares, that He's with us in our pain. The Bible says He is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit.
Yeah.
Over and over again, the Bible says we can cast our cares on God because He cares for us. He wants to know. He wants to hear our hearts, even if we're in a dark place, and maybe especially when we're in dark places. He, as a loving parent, wants to be the one we turn to in our pain.
Mhm.
He wants to be the one to hear our grief. His shoulders are broad. He can hear what you have to say. And if you're mad at him, he doesn't mind you telling him. He's not going to strike you with lightning. He knows what's in your heart. He knows the struggle. And we have Jesus who lived in a physical body, who understands the limitations of life on this dark planet and is quick to be with us when we are honest with him, when we reach out to him in love and trust. At the end of the day, we may not get all our questions answered. Everything may not be restored. Everything may not be well, but like Job, who suffered mightily and grieved deeply, we can be confident that if we keep reaching out for God, we will find more of him, even in the dark of the night.
So good. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you all for joining us today, and God bless you.
Bye bye.